Welcome to another episode of Industry Insights. And we have with us Laura Smith from Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And she's here to tell us more about their latest report on paper based flexible packaging. Please, Laura, can you give us an overview of the report and we'll take it from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have been looking at plastics for a very, very long time, but we're now for the first time looking at paper as well. And the question we began with here is, how can you design packaging that really across all materials is really minimizing harm, and what would that take? What does that look like? And we're really looking at that in this report and looking at how packaging can help tackle this really big problem of small format, flexible plastic waste and pollution. So we're looking at how paper-based packaging can help tackle that and what it would have to look like to do so.
Wow. So, Laura, interestingly, I recently I was reading up, and I think the foundation has always prioritized eliminate and reuse before circulation. So, so why has the foundation decided that now is the time to release a specific framework for paper-based flexibles?
Yeah. So the problem that we're looking at here is not a new problem. It's not a problem that suddenly began in 2025. It's been around for a while. And this is, flexible packaging. It's great. It's a wonder material in so many ways. It's really functional. It's really cheap. It's really convenient. It's bought products, branded products to low income consumers in rural areas. Great. And it's also one of the hardest packaging formats to deal with at the end of life. It's really hard to recycle and it has really low value, especially when it's small. And that means that, for informal waste pickers, there's just no business case to collect them. And because of that, they're very, very likely to leak into the environment. And that's been a problem since this packaging format has been introduced into the market. So why are we looking at this now, and why are we looking at alternative materials for this now? Really, because we're running out of time. It's the fastest growing category of plastic packaging globally, and the problem is growing in line with that. And we're on track for 20 trillion items of flexible
Wow.
packaging entering the
Yeah.
ocean by 2040, which is huge. And
Yeah.
as you said, the foundation has always prioritized eliminate and reuse. And we know that wherever possible, we do need to move away from these small formats altogether. Size is the main barrier to collection, not material choice. And it's been, it's easy and great to say that, but we also know that there's cases where that's really, really tricky.
Yeah.
And so the question has really been, how do we design the flexibles that we do use to minimize harm where that is really tricky? And that's a really timely question because it's okay for a long time to say, here's the real gold standard thing we need to be doing, but we also really need to be pragmatic about in the meantime, what can we do and how can we get agreement over what kind of packaging is a step in the right direction. So that's why we're talking about this now. A lot of businesses know it's a problem, know we need to do something, but has been quite uncertain or a lack of alignment over what the right thing to do is. So that's what we're trying to do now.
And I think when you are talking about the small format of flexible packaging, and a lot of it, we see it in South Asia and Southeast Asia. That's the most uh, affordable category of packaging, I think. And so but it does more or not turn out to be an environmental disaster. And I think that is where your report like shines a bit of light into whether how can we address this, right? Like how can paper address this? Now, if you're saying, according to you, how do you think paper specifically addresses the leakage issue, and especially where formal waste collection is weak?
Yeah. So there's two main benefits to paper-based packaging if it's designed in the right way, and it's really
Yeah.
important how it's designed. It's not just any paper-based packaging. So the first one is that in the worst case that it leaks into the environment, it's designed to be biodegradable across different environments.
Mhm.
So if it ended up, um, in nature, in
Yeah.
waterways, into the ocean, also in soil environments on land, it's meeting the criteria of tests that it would biodegrade. So that's
Mm.
really important. So there we're avoiding persistent plastic pollution. Um, and then the other benefit is that it is designed to be recyclable, and paper recycling systems, they're not perfect, but they are pretty mature. And there's been really great steps recently in India for looking at plastic recycling, but it's easier to recycle paper. It's more cost effective, and it's not perfect, but that pathway is there. So you can say, okay, there's a long-term pathway to recycling this material that's
Mhm.
feasible. If we sort the collection systems, which is no easy feat, you've got that long way pathway, and in the short term, if it does leak and we know that it is leaking, then it is also minimizing harm. So that's a really important part there.
Yeah, and the report also introduces six major criterias which define what the foundation calls as responsibly designed paper-based flexible packaging. So, can you elaborate more on those six criterias?
Yes, yeah. And these six criteria are really important. As I said, we're not just talking about any paper-based packaging. It's got to be paper-based packaging that really does bring these benefits of being biodegradable, and being recyclable, and also is not swapping one problem for another and really is avoiding those problems. So we look all the way through the value chain. We start with how it's sourced. We're saying it must be responsibly sourced to avoid contributing to forest degradation. It must be responsibly produced to minimize pressure on water resources and also the GHG footprint. It's got to meet the technical, the consumer, the economic needs to be viable in practice. And that's quite tricky. There's a lot of performance functionality parts that you need to packaging. That's tricky to get that right. And that's why plastic has been so popular for a long time. It's got to be recyclable locally, and supported by efforts to scale up collection infrastructure locally. And then in the case that it leaks, it must avoid hazardous chemicals and persistent plastic pollution. So it's got to be designed to be biodegradable and without the use of hazardous chemicals. And
Yeah.
then it's also got to fit within a broader circular economy strategy that's socially inclusive. So alongside reuse and other solutions and prioritizing those other solutions. And together those six criteria provide clear guardrails and guidance for innovators and businesses and investors to show what should paper look like, to play a really valuable role and mitigate these risks.
Wow.
Okay, and with from the elaborate, we do have like 6 points, but then that looks like it requires major innovation from industry and policymakers, right? So you're also mentioned in the report that you don't want to replace one problem with another, which we found very interesting. Like with speed, by speeding up like the development and scaling, you might end up like replacing one problem with another. So my question is, how do we make this reach the policymakers, and how do we enable inter-industry collaboration on this so that we don't end up harming the environment by just scaling up for one product?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the first part of this is really around really understanding and being really transparent on what are the trade-offs here. And there's a lot of very valid questions that a lot of people have been asking around, yeah, around exactly this, around, well, what is the impact on water use? Like if you do it in these areas that are water scarce, like that's a huge problem, and we're already we're already in a deforestation crisis. Like how would this not further contribute to that? And there's really, really valid concerns around all of that. So I think the first part of this is really being super transparent around what are the scale and the nature of these trade-offs. Um, and therefore, do we think that these can be mitigated sufficiently, and how? And I think they're questions that policymakers are asking, as well as industry, as well as NGOs, as well as, consumers who are using these sachets. So I think the first part, which we try to do in this report, is really lay out what are the extents of that risks and how can we mitigate them and what needs to be in place. I think what's also really important in kind of moving this conversation forward is then also like demonstrating that companies are taking this really seriously, and that they are committed to actually to investing in the kind of the innovation that's needed to realize packaging that meets all these conditions, which is no easy feat. There's a lot of innovation that's needed, to get packaging that is biodegradable and recyclable at the same time. That's actually really tricky. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
really exciting emerging solutions, but a lot more is needed. And demonstrating to policymakers that that is happening and that is feasible, I think also can give a lot of confidence that, looking at this issue as a priority to companies, and that companies kind of want the support to make this happen, and that there's real alignment and momentum in this direction. So yeah, I think beginning the conversation is really important, but then also actually making sure that we can demonstrate in practice that this is happening and this can happen and that there's a desire for this to happen.
That's true. Again, Laura, talking about the report, which talks about reducing reliance on the small format packaging, because this helps the reusing the reuse models that we want to focus on. But one of the significant developments, I think, in the packaging industry is was to reduce the pack size. Uh, so reduction actually has been the key focus for the industry. So does it not contradict the direction in which the industry is moving so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about collection and packaging, as I said, what really matters here is the size of the packaging, not
Yes.
the material. And I think, we've really got to acknowledge and we know, right, that there's a really big problem when the packaging that you're putting on the market, just there is not a business case for informal waste pickers to collect that. Why
Hmm.
would they? They have to collect so 60 sachets to get the same value as one PET bottle. So why would you do that?
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, that question, therefore, of how can you deliver products to consumers in a way that does fit into that end of life? And I
Yeah.
think there's many options for that. Um, but, we do need to be really, really aware if we're talking about this kind of small packaging that that's what's happening at the moment. Um, and so yeah, any kind of small packaging that isn't fitting into the system at the
Yeah.
moment, we've got to fix the system, absolutely. But it's also fundamentally just a really tricky thing to deal with at the end of life. So yeah, I think we're aware of that. But I think yeah, there's many options to look at that. But remember that size is the problem here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then coming up to the next question, I think less flexible plastics are often they often use complex barriers, right? And when we move to paper, the first challenge that we see is the use of forever chemicals like PFAS and plastic coatings, and that is a major problem that we have come across in like the innovation that's happening in India as well. And this is usually used in I think food industries, like because you can't just use paper directly. And so how do you think how does the report address this persistence criteria to ensure that we aren't just creating plastic coated paper again, that's which becomes even more harder to recycle, like because at least if it's fully
Yeah.
plastic you can recycle it. I mean, at least it goes somewhere, like you'd assume. But yeah, how does the report address
Yeah.
that?
No, it's really important, right? And I think as we've mentioned a few times, we're not just talking about any paper here. And at first glance, paper might look or there's some perception that it's better or safer than plastic, but really it all
Yeah.
comes down to design. And both paper and plastic can have a lot of very hazardous chemicals in them, both intentionally added, but also unintentionally added as well. And in both cases, we need to be really, really careful about how they're being made, and what lists of restricted chemicals they're adhering to, and the kind of regulation that they're sitting within to make sure that they are avoiding all of those chemicals. And that's true for both plastic and paper. In the case of paper, because a lot of these kind of packaging solutions that we're talking about are fairly new, there's a little bit of work to be done and conversations to be had around making sure that we do have really, really high quality lists in place and kind of regulation in place to make sure that they are held to a really, really high safety standard. And it's true that in some cases, some of these hazardous chemicals like PFAS bring
Mhm.
fantastic barrier properties. But there's also many other types of barrier coatings that do bring those properties. Um, and we need to do more kind of development to really take them to the market. But you can realize that without those hazardous chemicals, it's just really important to be super explicit from the get-go that, you know, we cannot use those hazardous chemicals and we need to be looking at these safer alternatives. But it's really important that that is top of mind for developers right from the beginning.
Yeah, and the report also mentions that solutions which meet all the six criteria that you mentioned are not yet widely available. So, what is the biggest technical challenge that you are seeing? Is it the moisture barrier you were talking about right now, or is it the cost, or is it the speed of existing packaging lines? Because even I think even when shifting from say multi-layer plastics to monomaterial plastics, the speed of packaging lines is something that is a bigger challenge for all the packaging companies that we see. So, what, according to you, is the biggest challenge that you are seeing?
Yeah. So I think there's a few. And for all of these, we're seeing really exciting things emerging, but there's a little way to go. So one of them, as you say, is the speed of filling lines. And that has quite a big knock-on effect on the cost of this. If you're
Mhm.
imagining that, you know, when you've got a big factory running over the day and you're actually producing sort of maybe 70% of much
Yeah,
packaging, then that's quite expensive. So fixing that or addressing that can have really, really big knock-on effects of the price comparison or the cost comparison between plastic and paper. So one part of that, for example, is paper is it has friction with the machines, and that can mean that it can tear. It has to be done in a slightly different way to plastic, which is very, very smooth. And so looking at the parts of the machine where friction really comes into play, that's one big part of it. It also has things like additional coating step where you have to put the coating onto the paper.
yeah,
That can add a bit of time. And sealing as well. So when you're kind of closing and sealing the bag, if you do it too hot with paper, it burns. If you do it too cold, it doesn't, you know, it takes a long time to kind of permeate the paper layer. So there's a few things like that. Um, and then in terms of the barrier properties, um, yeah, oxygen barrier is one thing
yeah,
that can be a bit tricky. Um, that's more important for some types of products than others. We're also looking at long shelf life that can come into play
oh
as
yes,
well.
yes, yes.
And that's really important, you know, in a market like India, where you have quite long supply chains as
Mm.
well to meet to get to kind of to local stores. Um, and getting that and at the same time this kind of golden trio of that kind of performance and also it being recyclable and also biodegradable. You
Yeah,
can get kind of individually those parts, but having them all together can require some quite innovative solutions or kind of layering of or kind of combination rather, a sort of tech stack of different solutions. So there's a few different ways you can do it. But what's really important then is that the innovation is directed towards getting all of it rather than just one individual part of it. And that means that a lot of collaboration is needed and a lot of kind of sharing of information is needed. But it's a different sort of way of developing when you have that really clear North Star
mm.
versus if you're just trying to focus on one small part of it in isolation. So quite a few challenges, but we hope that those challenges are kind of real
Yeah.
opportunities and quite exciting spaces to look out for, but certainly not super straightforward.
Uh, I mean, I'd just like to ask, but have you come across anything that shows promise so far, like in terms of scalability and meeting all those criteria? Like any product by any, are there any companies that are working in Europe markets or like anybody else?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I think this really depends on the product. So for some dry products that are not
Huh.
greasy, things like this, um, we are seeing some already on the market.
Okay.
So for example, and this also depends on the kind of the country and the shelf life and things like this, but for example, you know, pet food, some crisps, we're seeing some of that on the market already. they're not, there's still a little way to go. And as I mentioned, in some geographies that's a little harder than others. So, in
Mm.
India, it's very hot and humid compared to Europe, for example. And so you do need a little bit of additional kind of functionality to get
Yeah.
that functioning in that environment. But for those drier products, that's looking pretty good. When we're getting into liquid products, that's a little more complicated. So shampoo sachets, things like that. There are some really, really interesting innovations there.
Mhm.
Um, Not quite on the market at the moment, and
Okay.
quite a bit of work to go. And for a lot of these, it also does come down to it's very expensive at the moment, so looking at how we can reduce the cost of that. And then another kind of type of product that can be a little complicated is if it has grease barriers, it has like aroma barriers, so you want to keep smelling,
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
like that. And I said in all of these cases, making sure they work in hot and humid countries. So there's a lot of stuff happening. Um, but getting the kind of the scale right so that that can be cost competitive is one kind of barrier there. And and also, sharing the kind of the risks in some way of investing really big time into these innovations. That can be another slightly tricky thing. But yeah, I think, we've seen a lot of quite exciting things that make us think this is more than just a pie in the sky idea.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And with your examples, of course, like 44 brands are working with Ellen MacArthur Foundation, such as Unilever, Nestle, and PepsiCo. And with endorsements from these brands, the message is clear that there is a demand. So, what is the message to the R&D teams at these companies who are struggling to match the shelf life of the plastic with paper? That the point that you alluded to earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's no easy R&D feat, and there's been a lot of fantastic R&D teams that have been working on this for a very long time.
Yeah.
I think what's really important here, what can be a game changer here, is collaboration.
Mm,
And that's sharing the costs of the kind of transition that we're talking about here, and
yeah.
also the risks of that. And we were talking, for example, about filling lines earlier, and filling lines are huge. They're really, really enormous investments for an individual company to make. And their individual products used on that filling line can only take up a small fraction in many cases. So that's just one example of how getting scale and getting collaboration between different companies can really kind of move the needle on that in the way that an individual business might struggle to. And the same is true in also development when you've got um, great bits of ideas sitting all over the kind of the ecosystem and bringing those together and realizing how they can be, fill the gaps,
Yeah.
connect the puzzle pieces together can also really move that forward. So we think collaboration is really, really exciting opportunity in that space, and we really, really encourage that.
Wow. That's true.
And
Collaboration is the key.
in terms of collaboration, I don't think it's just the industry, but I think the people that we often overlook are the informal waste pickers, at least in the South Asia and Southeast Asian markets, right? Like we don't take them into account, but they do form like a very integral part of the chain. And I so how do you think this report sees paper sachets? Like, do you think you does this report call for more compostability in paper sachets? Like, it is like you had mentioned earlier, like you were focusing more on the biodegradability aspect of it, or are you saying there will be an aspect where even that will have value? Taking and
Mm.
collecting of those paper sachets will also carry a value and added value, or like incentivize, like more incentivization for them. So, do you see that, or like are you working towards more towards biodegradability and
Yeah, the end goal really is that these sachets are collected, that they do not leak into the environment. We're not aiming for these sachets to just be
Yeah.
designed to leak.
inevitable?
They
Okay.
should be collected, and that's really tricky. And that's why we were talking about collaboration and the importance of informal waste pickers here. Any kind of design and introduction of this packaging on the market does need to be done with waste pickers and collectors as well, and making sure that there is some system in place where they do have value and are able to access that value from those sachets. Um, and that needs to come with really significant investment and scaling of sorting and collection systems that really work. And we know that's really, really hard. But any effort into introducing these type of packaging has to come with real, yeah, huge efforts to do that at the same time and make sure that, yeah, waste pickers really, really do have some really good incentive to collect this type of packaging. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not a silver bullet because it doesn't address that part of it. You know, it in material substitution is not going to make that more likely to be
Yeah.
collected. It's got a really important safety net if it doesn't, but it needs to come with efforts to make sure that collection systems are in place as well.
Well
And
said.
not just with respect to sectors maybe, but also with respect to quantity. Like, do you think there is a possibility where in the future only the bigger, like the ones that are that can be reused. So suppose say 5 liters or like 5 kg packages, they are less likely to end up more in the landfill than like a 10 rupee sachets, right? Like, so are
Mm.
you saying that we'll focus on the smaller sachets first and not the bigger ones? Like the bigger ones can use flexible maybe, but then the smaller packages and everything else need to be paper based and only paper based? Or are you saying the industry should move to a point where everything is paper based? What are your thoughts?
We're really focused on small
Mm.
packaging. That's
Correct.
packaging that's leaking in very high rates into the environment. That's not to say there are not also challenges with larger packaging, for
Yeah.
sure. And there may be some cases where paper might make sense, but the kind of the trade-offs you're making or the cost benefit is a bit different there.
Mm.
And you do need to look at that as a kind of separate case. So we're really focusing on these small formats that are really, really very likely to to leak. And of course, an important part when you are looking at those small formats is, are there opportunities for there to be larger formats? And do they really have to be that small? Because of course, when you make the volume of the packaging larger, there's more of a case for that packaging to be collected. But we are really looking at, all those small packaging that really is going to remain as small packaging, and can't move to reuse, can't move to other packaging that's more likely to be recycled. This really, really tricky part, and that's where we're seeing a role for paper.
Also, I think it makes sense because in some countries it is unavoidable. Like it's not, it's a thing of, like we mentioned, an affordability issue, right? Like everybody can't purchase like the 5 kg packages at once. So I think in our country, in India and like a lot of other countries, the smaller sachets sell because they're more affordable. So you can't just do away with them. You can't say that no, we'll only manufacture 5 kg ones now. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's a really interesting point, right? Because of course, there's a lot of low-income consumers who purchase these sachets. There's also a lot of high-income consumers that purchase these sachets.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think, there are a lot of opportunities to move away from those sachets and really understand in much more detail who are purchasing those sachets and why. And is it really for socioeconomic reasons? And for that group who are purchasing for socioeconomic reasons, are there
Mm.
opportunities still for other formats of packaging and refill models and things like this? So I think like it's a really interesting question, who are purchasing these sachets and
Yeah.
why, and how can we deliver those products to those consumers in other ways and be quite imaginative and critical about that.
Actually, now that I think of it, it's not just maybe not the lower economic backgrounds, but I think in offices also you have those smaller sachets because they're more easier for people
Yeah.
to use the coffee or like say at like corporate meetings as well. Like I think you were given those smaller sachets of things because they're easier to dispense. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're super convenient, right? That's the wonder of
Yeah.
them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think one final thought that we have before we end this conversation. So, say if we sit down again in 2 years to talk about this, what would the success look like for this report? A, is it a specific number of sachets converted, or is it the change in global sourcing standards?
Yeah, so definitely two parts. One is that we're seeing less small format plastic pollution, and that being because there is this shift towards paper-based sachets. And the other being, what are those paper-based sachets and how are they designed? And are they really being designed in ways that are avoiding problems? But I think we really need to be super focused on, we're trying to tackle a problem here. We're not just trying to introduce some other big
Yeah.
big swathe of packaging into the market. Um, we're trying to address an existing packaging that's problematic. So we really want to see that problem being addressed and that rise in small format plastic sachets leaking into the ocean. We want to see that reducing
Hmm.
through this kind of substitution. And then that kind of substitution not swapping one problem for another and being done in ways that are protecting forests and are not putting additional pressure on water scarcity and all these things. So if we can see there's less plastic in the ocean, then that would be what we're aiming for.
Wow, amazing. Any final thoughts that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think this topic raises lots of questions and lots of excitement and opportunities. We really want to hear about that. We really encourage that. There's lots of interesting things we're looking at about ways to support companies to work together and work on this topic. So if you are interested in that, if you are working on this in some way, we'd love to hear from you and kind of see where this goes and see how we can support. But this is a real big value chain ecosystem effort that requires a lot of collaboration. So watch this space, but we really, really want to encourage those who are working on it to work together and reach out and have conversations with us about it as well. But
Amazing.
thank you so much. Yeah, it's
Great.
it's a big topic, lots of questions that are really, really important. So thank you so much for talking through that with me. It's very, very interesting.
Thank you so much, Laura. So, for our viewers, that was Laura Smith of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and they have been doing amazing work. So, stay tuned for more such insights with Industry Insights by What Packaging. See you in the
And I
next.
think you can also catch the story, the feature on the report and more information about it in the latest issue of What Packaging, which will be out, I think, this week. And yeah, please do subscribe.